Hi there, my name is Philip Ideson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. And today on the podcast, I'm going to share with you a session from our recent AOP Mastermind Live 2022 digital event. In this session called Agile Sourcing, How Digitization Drives Better Outcomes, I was joined by Wright, Director of Digital and Innovation Sourcing at BP, also Ben Weston, who is a Global Category Manager for Talent and Consulting at BP, and Graham Moore, a former colleague of mine from many years ago, who is now SVP of Alliances and Business Development at Globality. Now, in this podcast, we'll explore rethinking the sourcing process to be more responsive to the needs of the business stakeholders. Doing so requires us to think about how we engage with different stakeholders based on their individual needs. And I think this is a really critical component of our ability to 10x our impact. Now, to do so at scale requires the use of advanced technologies. So the team at BP, who are one of the world's largest integrated energy businesses, they shared with us how they have approached transforming their sourcing process to become more agile with a particular focus on service categories. Now, to level set on terminology, I started by asking Graham to explain what he means when he talks about the term advanced technologies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what we mean by advanced technology is the use of AI and, giving the consumer an intuitive experience, like we do when we buy at home, just making it simple for the business, making it a better way to engage, better way to understand what it is, from complex services that they want to procure, and then sort of automating that process. So just being very sort of slick in terms of how we go about allowing the business to self-serve and moving as much as we possibly can to self-service. That's what we're trying to do. So we're pushing the organization to self-serve as much around indirect services as we possibly can. That's what we mean by using technology to drive a better experience.
Now, I just want to ask you, you talk about self-serve. Is there a limit of what you can push into a self-serve environment, or is all spend kind of up for grabs, if you will?
Interesting question. The way we look at that, if it doesn't go in a catalog, you can use our platform for it. But right now we're orientated and concentrated on indirect services. So anything that doesn't go in a catalog from an indirect category perspective, then we say you can source that on the platform.
Yeah. So let me come to you, Nick. I want to just set the scene for the conversation and learn a little bit more about kind of the nature of the procurement organization at BP and some of the goals that you were chasing as you started to make the decisions to look at your technology stack and think more about advanced technologies from a procurement perspective.
Definitely. First thing I'd say is why stop at 10x? You've got to shoot high. And I just want to pick up, because it's a nice segue into what we're striving for at BP. And, Graham put it really nicely. Effectively, if we had the experience that a lot of us have in corporate procurement world, in our private lives, we probably wouldn't shop in those places. We'd just find other places to go. So why does it have to be so difficult and so archaic and take so long and be so manual in the corporate world? I'm failing to see a reason why. And, I think when we start to look at the procurement technologies that are coming through, they are absolutely helping us to get towards that stabilization, normalizing both sides of inside and outside of work. At BP in particular, that's something we're certainly targeting and putting our stakeholders and our customers at the heart of what we do, being truly digital. But the other thing is, about 18 months ago, we set out with quite a bold new corporate strategy, moving towards gas and low carbon. And in doing that, we effectively rewired the organization from top to bottom. And we lost a lot of people, about 20% of the organization. So with that perfect storm, within procurement, we've got the need to move towards a more consumer-like look and feel and experience, but also a gap to fill with technology. So that's really our guiding North Star and what's driving us today.
And so it's both an efficiency. There's a need from an efficiency perspective, but also from a customer experience perspective. When you think about your internal stakeholders, we talked in the last session actually about the importance of thinking about our stakeholders as customers. As you think, one, I want to go back to you talked about 10x and why stop at 10x. I love that. A big thing that we want to try and help the procurement community kind of think about is we are bound by our own thinking, like the thinking about what's possible for procurement. And so by starting to think whether it's 10x and whether it's even greater than that in impact, that starts us to think about, okay, how can we work backwards to start actually achieving those goals? Because we've got a new vision to kind of to pursue. Now, I do want to talk just one more question a little bit more generally. You talked about the broader strategy at BP of moving towards low carbon. Like how does that change how you do procurement? Does that change how you do procurement?
Absolutely, it has to change how we do procurement. We set a fairly bold new corporate agenda, and it's gas low carbon. It's a departure to what we were doing previously, and it's a goal that the whole organization is invested in. Mm-hmm. To do that and to be successful in what we've set out to do, procurement needs to find new ways of working and moving towards things like partnering with suppliers to figure out how we're going to solve these problems that, to be honest, don't yet always have a solution or an obvious one. And to do that takes a lot more time and effort and nurturing of those relationships. And there just isn't the capacity to focus on the transactional spaces and the day-to-day, and also focus and nurture and grow these relationships and partnerships with our supply base. So when we start to look at how procurement technology can support us in balancing those two competing priorities, it frees up the organization. It frees us up in procurement then to focus on those more strategic activities and the things that we need to happen to be a success.
Now, I'm going to come to you in a moment as well, Ben, but I have a question. I'm going to just refer this back to you, Nick, and then bring Graham in as well on it. We talked a little bit in advance of today's session, and it's in the title of the session around agility. So one of the things I know you've focused on is around making procurement more agile at BP and more quickly able to meet the challenges that we have around us from the volatility in the economy, for example. And I wonder if you could talk about what agility as well kind of means to you in the context of the ongoing transformation that you have.
So we have a strap line, and Ben will probably nod when he hears me say this, but we have to perform whilst we transform, right? We've got a massive task on our hands, but we need to keep the business safe, resilient, and running. So in order to do that, we need the agility to be able to do the day jobs and do what we do well, but fund this growth and this transition into the low carbon energy spaces that we've set out to do. And where agility comes into it, we need to prioritize. We have a finite amount of time, and we need to make sure that we're ruthless in working on the things that are going to support that strategy. And if we're doing things that don't support where we need to go as an organization, as a business, in procurement and across the group, then we need to have hard conversations with ourselves as to should we be doing those things. And for me, that's where that prioritization element of agility comes into it. We don't have a crystal ball. I mean, who does? And it's moving away from the traditional cyclical, set some goals in January and come back in December and see how you've done. The world's changing so fast, especially in procurement. Look at inflation. Who could have guessed that 12, 18 months ago? So again, that's where agility comes into it, to process and prioritize in real time. And, it takes a lot of mental capacity to do that. And again, this is where we're leaning into these procurement technology tools that can take away that transactional work for us and can take away some of that workload to free us up to think on the more strategic and in-depth elements of what we need to do.
And Ben, how are you finding that in practice? When I gave the introduction, I talked about the fact that you're overseeing, I think, professional services and travel from a category perspective. Are you seeing that need to be for speed and agility from your stakeholders?
Absolutely. I don't think it was ever anything different, to be honest, Philip. Mm-hmm. I think, to build on some of the comments Nick and Graham have added, the reason I find the talent acquisition side of professional services so exciting is we do need to perform whilst we transform. As Nick said, we're transforming from an international oil company to an integrated energy company. There's a lot of focus on letting our leaders across the entities that now form BP kind of run with their process, drive the business strategy, but we need to do it as a leaner organization. And the irony of this is we actually need to put more control measures in place for those people that want to run their processes. So the technology roadmap and kind of, well, what we call, and I think it's quite a widely used term in the industry, building this digital ecosystem, if you like, of driving services procurement is absolutely key. We've got stakeholders who want what they need quickly, but they need to make sure they tick the boxes of our kind of discretionary spend approvals list, if you like. So there needs to be a sustainability element to it. There needs to be a cost management element. There needs to be separate business cases to deal with the volatility that we're all experiencing right now. But we need to get what is effectively a really emotive topic of bringing third-party experts in. We need to get all of our stakeholders on that digital journey of saying, you now use this. We are going to route you through this process through targeted learning of systems. It will remember you. It will remember your negotiations that we're helping you with. So it's a hearts and minds piece. And I think procurement always has been in professional services. They know what they want. We don't want to be a blocker. We want to be an enabler. And post our reinvent process, where we're a lot leaner, we need to have those solutions in place and talk to them about the value add right from the offset to get them on that journey.
Yeah, and if you're not a enabler, then they will find a way to work around you at the end of the day. I was responsible for professional services as well in my past in consulting, so and travel actually. So I completely empathize.
Great set of categories.
Yeah, just to build on what Ben said, one of our early conversations was around change, and I know I think that's a topic coming along a little bit later in the session. But Ben, Nick, isn't it fair to say once we've convinced the business user to use the technology, they don't want to stop using the technology? It'd be interesting.
There's no going back. Yeah, there's no going back. When old way of working, you'd put in a request and it'd sit in a queue for a while, and eventually find somebody in the procurement team, and then they probably get back in touch with you and ask you what you want, and the process really starts from there. With things like Globality, we can put those, we can reduce and condense those steps into one interface, into a portal, and Ben can share a bit more on how that's showing up in BP. But within an hour or so, that stakeholder kind of created a statement of work, pushed it into the marketplace, and that's condensed something that probably would have taken days into hours, and into, more importantly, something that they've done themselves. So I think it is an absolute mindset shift to put that power into our stakeholders' hands in a controlled way. So it's not a free-for-all. There's a set of boundaries around that and that control that Ben alluded to, that we can manage centrally. But it really is a massive cultural change that, from what we're seeing, people, once they've started, don't ever want to come back from.
So I'm going to encourage anybody who has questions, please do keep those questions coming in. Complete the box underneath the video form here. I'm going to bring in one question right now because it's actually related to the mindset point that you made, Nick, and I'm going to pose this to Ben. So let's bring that in. So do suppliers have to share procurement's mindset around agility in order to be effective partners on that journey? What's your experience?
Sure. They do. I think if I use our consulting area, which is obviously the high profile, high value part of our professional services offering, we mustn't forget that their success is forged out of relationships with our exec suite, our C-suite. And so when it comes to strategies, the problem with some of these discretionary spend areas, as they're rightly called, is it's really hard to get a very clean list of stakeholders. So if you can go to the top of the pile and understand what the journey is, we're fortunate, Nick and I'm speaking for Nick here, because we directly report into the finance org and our CFO's office. And that gives us great wealth of data, if you like, to see what has happened. We can see what we have spent. We can see who we have spent with. We can see what areas of the business and what geographies were utilizing those services. Our job is to get ahead of those conversations. And you can't do that without alliancing with your big partners. It's not classic Pareto, but we can capture an easy 80% of our spend. And the strategies that we build are such that we can, in a way, kind of cut and paste for the tail spend that everyone experiences. But if you can't get those vendors and those strategic partners on the journey to say, look, here's the problem statement. Let's actually talk your language and turn it into a statement of work. The desired outcome or outcomes are this. We believe the stage gates to get there along the journey are this. We don't have enough of this insight. We don't have enough of this forward planning. We don't have enough of tracking when you've offered us investments or discounts versus the lovely MSA rate carded fees. We can't actually speak on your behalf. Oh, and by the way, sorry to point out the real obvious, but you're getting great business where you've nurtured those relationships. But what about all of the areas that you're missing? And I think what we've done on our journey so far, certainly when it comes to the adoption of our digital enhancements, is to say, you might have X% now. We're happy for you to have 99%, but we need you to work for it. We need you to partner with us, and we need you to prove that return on investment that we're being challenged as procurement to deliver. It's been quite well adopted so far. I mean, I am fortunate that I work in a category that a lot of our kind of major are leaders in this kind of digital transformation. But short answer, yes, they have to be as involved and as on board, if you like, as our key stakeholder groups within the business.
And Graham, is that something that's echoed across BP's experience is similar to what you see across your client base?
Totally. I mean, one of the things with BP that I think Ben alluded to is the fact that procurement roll right into finance, so they have visibility. And we started with professional services together, and it helped that there was a mandate top down. I think EVP, Ben, if memory serves me correct, that says, right, I want to form a panel. I have my 5-6 preferred professional services providers. I want them to competitively bid for the work. Obviously, Ben and team have worked with those providers, so they know what's going to happen. And to Ben's point, we want you to work for it, but we want visibility, and it's going to be competitive. So that's a common story for us across other customers as well. So yeah, and frankly, when you talk to the providers, their experience, their digital experience, and the way they engage with their customers is a good experience for them as well. And I think that's fundamentally, important towards the successful use of the digital technology.
Now,
yeah, and Graham, I think it's. Sorry, Philip, I was just going to say, I think it's absolutely essential to remind ourselves what they did before we brought in these enhancements. We're actually taking time out of their steps as well. So long as we don't add stages, to Nick's earlier point, it's not a hard conversion. If we can get them on the journey of delivering those beneficial stages, yeah.
Now, what I was going to ask Ben is, we alluded to earlier about the fact that it's a more streamlined sourcing process that you go through that's obviously enabled by this advanced technology. So that folks who are watching can actually visualize what that looks like, could you kind of walk us through what a sourcing process could look like, or does look like, as you're using it with the technology that you're using versus perhaps what it was before?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So when it comes to our consulting engagements, we partner with Globality. I think the best way I'd summarize the previous setup is that there's no one way. We have a series of different templates. We have a series of different templates within different entities and business groups within, and ultimately building a requirements list, an RFP, I suppose, or an RFQ rather than an RFI. It is open to challenges around consistency. Even when we're utilizing the same suppliers against different parts of the business. So what we do now is we've got that robust approval process that Graham alluded to. We've got financial approvals, but we've also got business case approvals that need to go up to our C-suite, particularly in the areas of consulting. We want to know that it's not something that's been done before, but the other part of the business don't know about it. We want to know that it's creating new hypotheses and strategies that we can't replicate that have been developed already. And we want to make sure that we don't have the internal capability to do it, but actually an individual or a group's default position is let's go out to an external partner. The reality is we're kicking the tires and we're validating going externally every time now. But then when we get to it, what we've really succeeded with Globality on is a uniform way of building a requirements list. With a blank Word template, it takes at least an hour. It takes sharing, from my experience, it takes approvals up the chain. And what we've been able to do with Globality and what we've received great feedback on in terms of its intuitiveness is the requester can access it through single sign-on. It starts with a very open question of what are you looking to achieve? And from there, the learning starts, and it starts to target very focused questions on what they're looking to achieve, in what timescales, in what geographies, etc., etc. And you can use that tool. We've used it simply for building a requirements list, and then it's been taken out. But actually, where the real success has been is getting us all the way up to preferred bidder when procurement take over and get into those lovely BAFO discussions. So where it's been used best, and as Nick said, once they're on the journey, they want to stay on it, is build the requirement, focus 35 to 40 minutes tops, and you can get an RFP. You can involve your senior vice presidents, you can involve whoever you need to review it, who can doctor it and query it before it's released. But you can then release it to the partners. You can set timescales on when to receive it. There is a weighted scorecard built into the process, and you can assign scorers in the system ready for when it comes in. And you can get to the stage where it spits out the weighted aggregate scores. The beauty of it all the way through, Philip, is our procurement setup is category and supply-facing procurement, but then we've got an amazing team in our global business services function that looks after the sourcing element, the contract enablement, the negotiation, and they can be tagged to it. And if they wish, with a coffee every morning, they can log in and they can see where we are in the RFP journey. And that's why it's been so successful in areas like our sustainability and strategy teams, is they can build the requirement. We can set them up for success. We can step away, we can let them build it, but then we can jump in the chat function or separately, and we can add weight to it. Now, it doesn't pay. We've got our own SAP systems for that, but it allows us to get to the stage where we can appoint a bidder and we can enable a contract that calls off and make sure that they get paid at the appropriate stage gates. Well, that's quite high level.
Well, it was a great kind of, I think as people listen, they can visualize what the process looks like and perhaps how that differs from their own process from a sourcing perspective. I want to just come to Nick, when you're looking to implement this new sourcing process using the technology that you are, from a change perspective, was that a tough sell, or was there definitely openness amongst the stakeholder community? And I think you're on mute. If you just want to take yourself off mute, there we go.
Yeah. So just to recap on what Ben said, we're trying our best to remove procurement from the equation.
Yeah.
I've said this so many times, but no one wakes up and says, I want to deal with procurement today. Let's be honest. I think we add a lot of value to the organization. We enable our strategies, but, legacy views of procurement, we are a means to an end, perhaps. So everything that Ben's just said condenses all of those boundaries into a single marketplace, and allows the intake and the requirements to be gathered automatically and pushed through the flow. In terms of adoption, I think we're fairly mature in our technology journey within BP. We have existing marketplaces that we brought in that others and users and the organization has seen and felt the benefit of. So that almost glides the way for further procurement technologies such as Globality. And there's a few out there. But I think once our stakeholders, once our users, once our professionals see the benefit of those tools, it's less of a threat and more of a something to help, augment and be able to, again, back to the point, focus on a bit more of the higher value strategic work.
How about if you flip that to the procurement professional? I think that, do you find that there is fear from the procurement team that, well, now we're bringing in technology that's going to replace the buyer? How do you kind of manage that communications as much as on the stakeholder side?
Yeah, I think it's if we zoom out a little bit, procurement and the role we have is changing. It's less about banging on the table and lowest price, and it's more about, are we doing the right thing for society? Are we buying sustainably? Are we protecting our people and our planet? So whilst the tools can help us in those spaces specifically, it gives us the time and it gives us the capacity to do the real deep thinking, to figure out how we're going to do those things, and get to them, in the best possible way.
And Graham, I'll pose that to you too. What do you see across? Do you see that as being a big change management hurdle, or are there any specific tactics or strategies that you employ as you're talking to your clients around the opportunity here, as opposed to looking at it as something to fear?
Yes, it's an interesting question, and varies by customer engagement, I guess, and attitude. If you listen to both Ben and Nick, you can understand the passion of the innovation, and that's not that common. And yes, that question, is this a threat or is this a blessing to me as a procurement individual, comes up. But I think it's about going on the journey, and folks are in different sort of stages of that journey. But once, I think from a procurement perspective, once the procurement team understand that this is going to enable them to do so much more of what they signed up for, and free them and give them the capacity to go and do that, then they embrace the technology. But there is a bit of a journey. And again, if I look at where other customers are, like BT and Santander, their journeys, started, in a couple of category areas, and you already see BT in the market announcing they're going to achieve 2 billion through the platform before the end of the year. That's enormous. So they went through that curve as well, in terms of adoption with us and us working together on how to get the business, to embrace the innovation, if you like. And I go back to something I said to Ben and Nick just a minute ago around, once the business users experience it, there's no going back. And it becomes evangelical. And I use that word a lot. And it's like, why are we not using it? Why are we not on the platform? This looks really cool. And they really value and rave about that sourcing experience. To Nick's point, no one gets out of bed in the morning and says, I want to go and talk to procurement. This is a great way to engage and collaborate with procurement, in a way that you've not done before. Go back to where we first started around, trying to make it as consumerized as we possibly can. It is really that experience that brings them back to the platform. Ben said it. remembering what you did last time, learning about outcomes, tactics, what your colleague did before you, and really driving that value. It's a better way to engage with procurement and the business, whether you're a collaborator or the originator or doing both.
Yeah. I'm a huge believer that for us to think about 10xing or even further the impact that we have to embrace approaches like this, and we have to have that mindset of it's not like this is the wrong way of putting it, like outsourcing yourself, but it's like, how do we find ways to be more effective? So as Nick said, procurement is not stuck in the middle. We're enabling. I think about the idea of spend enablement versus spend management a lot. We're enabling the business to do what they need to do. We're bringing a lot of expertise in there to help them, but we're not there to manage their spend on their behalf, because ultimately it's their budget. What can we do to help that go faster? We have a very specific question, Ben, I'm going to pose to you just around what you were talking about, the process, and the question you were talking about requirements and how you're able to really minimize the time it takes to build a scope of work, for example. The question was there a lot of work when you start the process to actually build a requirements tool?
Yeah, great question. No. I think if I speak really candidly, I inherited a category that was in a fairly good state, to be honest. It needed a new category strategy. It needed a new direction. More than anything, we needed to identify the opportunities in the category, and the opportunities lead to the value levers that ultimately make your strategy. Mm-hmm. Digital enhancements are a big one of those, but so is collaboration with the businesses, so is building strategic alliances, so is changing the maturity of the discussion with our partners. We sell services too. Where are they offsetting? Where are they charging their vehicles? It needs to be a much more mature collaborative conversation. When it comes to the requirements, though, we've got a good grasp on what BP are trying to achieve. To Nick's earlier point, the direction and the vision is really well communicated, and even more so internally amongst staff. So we can sit down with it's quite a cold term, but I know it's any stakeholder and say, right, what are you looking to achieve? Why? What's the ultimate benefit? And how does that link larger scale into BP's strategy? So when it came to that set of requirements, we had quite a clear view on, okay, let's start at the back and let's start at the end and work our way backwards. What is the outcome? What does it stop us doing that we do now? What are we making more lean? What are we making more efficient? And really, that's kind of what we work with for all of our tech partners so far, but especially with Globality, we've just said, look, we'd like the questions to start with what's the eventual outcome, and then what we'd already built into our Word document templates a year prior to that is, and how does that link to BP strategy? So we've actually built that into the Globality platform, and you cannot pass until you've answered that question in free text. So it's been a fun journey to mandate some of those questions and kind of put the hard hat on, if you like, Philip, and see what the response from the users would be. It's actually been very warmly embraced. It has been a journey. It has been a journey, but back to your earlier point, they actually, our colleagues want guidance. They want procurement to add value to the process, and then they want us to step aside and say, I get it, I know who you are, you'll be involved all along, but I think what you're telling me is I don't need to have 4 Teams calls or Zoom chats. I can sign on, and then you'll receive an alert to review what I'm doing. Is that correct? And that's been a real game changer. Sorry to talk over you, Nick.
Oh, it's all right. I think that's all absolutely correct. But there's a bit more of I think there's a cultural process that needed to happen and needs to happen in any organization to increase your adoption of these tools. We started way back a couple of years ago with App Orchid. That was the first tool that we brought in. We bought Fair Market a while back, and they're doing what they're doing for BP, and now we're working with Globality. And I think the more of this procurement tech that you adopt, the easier it does to do the next one, and the cultural change happens, and the acceptance and the adoption. So if anyone's thinking about it, they're all, great, and I'm sure there are other tools out there. I'd just say you've got to start with one, start small, scale it, get the success, bank the wins, and then, repeat. So there's definitely a cultural laying of the
foundations
that needs to happen working with these tools.
But it doesn't seem quite so scary the next time you do it. Sorry, Graham.
No, I was going to add to that. Another dimension is that when you, again, listen to the passion of both Nick and Ben on this topic, is other conversations I have with procurement executives, CPOs, is they actually use this digital innovation and the journey they're on to attract new talent. The new procurement DNA that Nick spoke about, it's long gone are the days of banging your hand on the table or going into a room with no windows, turning the heating up and not offering any drinks, right, until you come out of a contract sign. It's about this, the new tech, the way to engage with a business better and more effectively is being used to retain and attract. And I think that's a fact. When I first started talking to BP, one of the really cool things was they had a vision on where they wanted to go, and I didn't see any barriers in terms of the art of the possible. So when we first started talking, the lights went on immediately, and we were completely aligned about the applicability of the journey they were on and where we fitted into that.
So I want to transition the time that we have remaining into what's next. And I'm actually going to ask you this first, Graham, from your perspective. You've obviously observed the journey that BP are going on. You observe the journeys that other clients are going on, and you've been transformation for a long, long time. Where do you see the next step on the journey for the team at BP, and how are you supporting that?
Good question. I think to go basic for a second, I think we just need to see this at scale together. We're at the, I wouldn't say we're at the beginning of our journey. We're on our journey, we're up and running, but now we need to scale and really start to embrace and realize all of the benefits that we're talking about. So, we need to push as much sourcing to self-serve as we possibly can, I think, to reap the benefits. The other thing I would say, and I'm sure BP will keep us on task for this, is we have to continually innovate. We don't stand still. The innovation doesn't stagnate. We've got to keep pushing the boundaries. People like BP, BT, Santander, Quantima, other customers are always pushing for, as well, and coming up with other potential ways the platform could be used. We listen to that. We bring our own dimension to that conversation as well. So I think, not stagnating the innovation keeps it fresh. When you look at categories, and I look at Nick and Ben when he talks about his passion around his category, when you look at some of the other category areas like technology, IT, ironic conversation we're having about new tech, but you have to keep ahead of the curve on this as well. So the AI needs to keep ahead of the curve on this as well. So continually bringing new ideas, new services, I think is very important. That's how I see the future, scaling and continually to innovate.
Nick, I'm going to kind of pass the same question over to you. Where are you looking forward to on your journey to continue to use these advanced technologies to enhance the procurement value proposition?
Yeah, I mean, the proof's always in the pudding in terms of the outcomes that we're getting with these tools. And, Graham made a really good point on the need to innovate and, to enhance and to build and to evolve these tools. So for me, that's the one to watch. What's the broader landscape? What's being developed? What is of interest to BP? And the things that are already in the estate, how are they evolving and how are they comparing and how are they getting better? And it's, I think it's much more of a faster fail mentality within procurement at this stage. And, not being afraid to experiment, measure, and then take decisions based on, on what we find. So, I think it's going to be an exciting months, years, decades within procurement, especially within this tech space. And I think it's just the start of the beginning. So it's going to be exciting.
Do you find that implementing advanced procurement technologies creates advocates out of stakeholders, so they can see that you're trying to do things that actually help them and make their lives easier? And even if you don't hit it out of the park every single time, because you talked about kind of failing quickly as well and doing experimentation, they're actually wanting to be a part of that process because they can see the benefits of what you're trying to do for them.
Yes and no. For the yes, absolutely. I think there's a lot of support. I think there's a lot of encouragement, a lot of shared excitement. For the no's, maybe slightly more skeptical. I think in the more advanced areas of the business, it's to them, I guess, more about procurement catching them up on the level of digital and what it can do in terms of outcomes. So we're sort of way behind the curve. Not that that's a bad thing, because I think for a long time procurement technology has been underinvested relative to the business and other areas of IT. So it depends. But in general, I think what really matters to people is are we making your lives easier? Are we protecting our cost base? Are we doing things quicker? Is the experience a good one? And I think if we can get all those things right, then we're winning.
So I have really only a minute or two for the answering of this question. So it's going to be a quick fire question to wrap things up. And Graham, I'm going to put you on the spot first as I ask you it, so that Nick and Ben can have a little bit of time to think about their answer. We're all about taking action here at Art of Procurement. And so what I want to ask you is, what's one thing that our audience can do today to start the process of using digitization to drive better outcomes within their businesses?
I think just take from today everything you've heard. Don't be frightened to go for it. If my CEO was on this call right now, he said the only way to start innovation is to get started. So do something innovative. Don't hold back.
Ben?
Align with your senior leadership team's transformation journey or company strategy, especially the areas of where they're looking to go digitally.
Thanks. And Nick, final word.
I would just say, take a risk, take a controlled risk. If it doesn't work, drop it quickly and move on. But sometimes you've got to really push out your comfort zone to deliver true innovation, and that involves risk. Okay,
that's something that we sometimes struggle as for procurement professionals, because we've had the risk aversity beaten into us, since those very first sourcing exercises we did all those years ago. I want to thank you, Graham, Nick, Ben, so much for today's session, for joining us to talk about your journey at BP, but also the role that advanced technologies can play and are playing for procurement organizations as we continue to look for ways to 10x and beyond the impact that our teams have. So thank you so much for joining me. If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, an event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.